G'day guys, Travis here from Fitness Education Online, and thank you very much for joining me for this week's video. This week I'm going to be working with one of my favourite bits of equipment, the kettlebell. I love kettlebells, they're super versatile and you can use them in so many different ways. So let's get into this video and share with you some of my favourite kettlebell exercises.
We help personal trainers grow their business.
So we're looking at some of my favourite kettlebell progressions this week. Now we're going to look at the progressions for some common movements you're likely to be using within your boot camp or within your one-on-one PT sessions. And what we're talking about today is how you can make those common movements a little bit harder without having to add extra weight. So we're going to be looking at the common movements are the deadlift, the swing, some squat and lunge variations, the press variations, and some row variations. So let's get into today's content and have a look what it looks like. Okay, so the first progressions we're going to look at are the deadlift progressions. Now I'm going to be working with a 12 kilo kettlebell today to show you how you can incorporate some of these things without needing a huge kettlebell. Because each of these progressions we're going to work with, I can tell you, are challenging for me. Now the first one, like I said, is the deadlift. If I'm just doing a standard kettlebell deadlift, kettlebell in the middle, down, hinge at the hips, and standing tall, I can basically do this all day without too much of a problem. Yeah, maybe not all day, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but I can go using those standard deadlifts over and over and over. So some of your clients might be in that same scenario. So what you can do to vary this up are a couple of different subtle little changes. First one's nice and easy. Offset the load. Do a suitcase deadlift. That's one of the easiest variations to start with because, you know, it's just simply offsetting the load, changing the patterns on your obliques and on your abs there as well, and just a slightly different variation. Now I can tell you with a 12 kilo kettlebell, the standard deadlift I almost don't feel at all. This one I start to feel it a little bit because obviously that weight's only in one hand now, and again it's offset. So it's nice and easy, starts off to the side, everything else is the same. Standing nice and tall. Nice and simple. So that's probably the first and most simple progression. The next one is an offset stance. So looking towards the single leg variation. So I've got one leg in front, one leg behind. You can do this either two hands on the bell or one hand on the bell. My preference is single hand on the bell, but I find it just a little bit more comfortable. So I've got one hand, 1 foot back, 1 foot forward, hinge. Trying to keep almost as much of my weight as possible on that leg that's forward. If your clients find that nice and easy, you can then look to keep that leg up off the ground, or you can look to shoot it back in more of an arabesque style position. So there's the next variation. Just stay in the one spot, single leg deadlift. From there, you can move into like a walking, like a zombie walk or a monster walk variation. So, which would just be, we'll go sideways here. Again, with this one, you can either change hands or do two hands on the belt. So you can either go, you know, one hand down, stand up. Or two hands on the belt. It's important, just short steps here. And again, you're looking to keep a predominant amount of your weight on that front foot. So, they are some of the most common deadlift variations you can use to progress people through a whole heap of different variations to make it harder without using a heavier belt. So, next thing I want to look at is some of the swing variations. Now we're not going to go into anything, like I said, crazy complex in this video, but I'm just going to show you some simple things that work for one-on-one or for boot camp especially, because they're just subtle differences to the movements that they already know, those movements that they already patterned and they already know. So the swing, standard two-hand swing, would be obviously the most easy variation. Second one would be just going to single arm swing. From there, you progress to single arm swing with a changeover. From there, you can go to a skier swing. So again, all that's super similar because it's all in the same sort of plane of motion. From there, you can go to a shovel swing. So you're starting to play around now with that transverse variation. And from there, you can go into a pendulum swing, which is completely different again. So, and also on top of that, you can actually, even easier to start with, you can actually do walking swing. Walk. So nice and simple, simple progressions you can do for the swings to make them just that little bit harder for your clients. All of those work wonders. So we're going to have a look at like the squat and lunge variations you've got as well, almost in one go, because these are pretty much the same sort of thing. So the most simple variation for both squats and lunges would be that goblet style position. So goblet lunge, or goblet squat, goblet lunge. Simple. The first progression for both of those would be your rack position. So either rack squat or that rack lunge. From there, you can look at, if you've got clients who can do the overhead squat, my overhead squat is fairly rubbish, but you've got the overhead squat or overhead lunge, forwards, backwards, doesn't really matter. You can then also play around with like changing hands or changing the bell around. So you can almost go into a squat figure eight, so like a squat hold with a figure eight. And you can do the same thing with a lunge. So you're lunging, passing the bell through to the other side. You can also play around with squats, squat stance, so it's not straight. Lateral lunges. There's a few other variations you've got there as well. But they are simply the most simple variations and sort of the best bang for your buck variations when it comes to squats and lunges. So having a look at the shoulder press now. Shoulder press, 12 kilos, I'll be able to bust out a few reps nice and strict like that without a problem. So nice and simple from there. If you wanted to, you could start playing with things like the jerk and playing with the timing. So instead of 45 seconds, maybe they're going to work, a minute or 90 seconds of jerks instead of strict presses. So there's one subtle way you can play around with it. The next one would be changing positions. From a lunge position or a kneeling position, it's much harder. And then from a seated position, it's harder again. Now, this ground here is more sloped than it looks. So this one's quite hard because I'm actually battling the slope to stay upright to start with. So we're here and pressing. So those simple variations to start with are an easy way of making your presses just that little bit harder. If you need to go harder again, you can start playing around with that bottoms up position, where the bell is in the air. And these variations are a lot harder. You're focusing on keeping that bell upright, fires all the little stabilizers in your shoulder. Got to keep tension with your whole body. And it becomes a much harder exercise. For me personally, I find that brings it like to your anterior delts at the front there. I find that really burns. Trying to keep it stable. That is a great variation. Now again, that one's probably your hardest of the variations. 12 kilo kettlebell, bottoms up, I find that quite challenging. You know, like, so it is far more challenging than just your standard press. So if you're working with an 8 kilo kettlebell and if they can't bust out, you know, 20, 30 repetitions of just presses, you know, they're probably not going to be able to do the bottoms up with that weight. So they are some of the press variations. Now we're going to look at the row variations. Now the most standard row variation is just that staggered stance. So we're just here and rowing. So you can vary that up with a, I believe I've seen this called a gorilla row, I think, where what you're going to do is you're going to go through the middle and you're actually going to row and change hands at the top. I mean, you can change hands at the bottom as well to make it easier. Again, more unilaterally loaded, okay? And obviously if you're changing hands at the top, it's different again and makes it a bit harder. The next variation, we're going to move the camera a little bit and have a look at the single bell renegade row, which is actually one of my favorite ones that you can use for boot camp because you only need one bell instead of two, and the renegade row is one of my favorite exercises. So if we're looking at the renegade row, you need like a bench or a stool or a seat or something like that that's, you know, roughly, you know, what they would be in a push-up position or a little bit higher because the kettlebell has a bit of height to it. So you want to make sure you're in, you've got that stable surface to work with. From there you make sure your hands and shoulders are in line. So you don't want to be in this sort of position, nice and over the top. Feet as wide as you need to stay stable. And you can either go single arm or you can alternate. So one, change hands, one. The renegade row is one of my favorite exercises. Works anti-rotation, works the core, really strong, challenging exercises. Works through all your shoulders, your stabilizers, everything gets worked in the renegade row. The only drawback is typically you need 2 kettlebells to do it. This variation you only need 1, which is why it makes it one of my favorite ones. Okay guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed all of those variations I've shared with you. Just to recap, we had a look at some deadlift variations, we had a look at some swing variations, squat and lunge variations, press variations, and some row variations. So we had 6 different types of progressions that you can start using in your boot camp or with your PT clients straight away. As always guys, thank you very much for tuning in for today's video. If you like it, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below if you're using any of these variations, or if you've got some different ones that you love to use, or whatever your favorites are. We always want to hear from you as well. Don't forget, as a subscriber to the channel, you actually can get a free copy of our Bootcamp Games mini course and join our Facebook group for personal trainers. Over 11,000 members in there now, always trying to give tons of support, tons of value to our community and our group there. So thank you very much for watching guys. See you around. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.